Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning and welcome to everyone present in the Chamber and those listening online to the business of the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee. I am Ian Carrington, I'm a councillor and I am the chairman of this committee, and Councillor Martin Griggs, the vice chairman, is also in attendance. A couple of housekeeping notes. The audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website, and all your comments will remain accessible online. And we don't have a fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please leave the chamber, exit the building through the reception, that's at that end for those physically present, and assemble in the front car park and await further instructions. Your mobiles, laptops and iPads should also now be on silent, and that includes the chairman. The hearing loop is also now activated for anyone who needs it. I'm not seeing any immediate requirement. If you do need the hearing loop, please speak to one of our officers. Request to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman. Please indicate early when you wish to speak, and we now move on to the formal agenda. So beginning with item 1, apologies for absence and replacement members. Andrew Warnes to report. Andrew.
Good morning, Chairman. We've got one apologies from Councillor Callum Cook, and today he's replaced by Councillor Noyce for this meeting only. No other apologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and good morning, Councillor Sear. Item 2, declaration of members' interests. This is an opportunity for members to declare any pecuniary or other interest. Do any members wish to declare any? I am seeing no member indicating at the moment. If an interest does become evident to you as we proceed through the meeting, please catch the chairman's eye. We now move to item 3, which is minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of October 2024. This item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record, and you will find those in pages 5 to 20 of the agenda pack. I won't go through them page by page. You have all had an opportunity to read them. Any comments on the minutes to begin with? Seeing none. Do I have a proposer, please? Councillor Griggs, seconded by Councillor Fleetwood. All those in favour? Those are agreed as a true record, and I will sign those at the end of the meeting. We now move to item 4, announcements by the chairman, executive councillors and lead officers. From the chair, when we look forward to our future meetings, the committee is currently scheduled to meet on Tuesday, the 25th of March 2025. Now, we've been made aware that the pre-election period for the County Council's elections next year will start on Friday, the 21st of March. So, in order to facilitate all necessary business of the committee, I'm therefore seeking your agreement as members to move that meeting earlier and hold it on Tuesday, the 11th of March 2025, at 10 o'clock in the morning instead of the currently scheduled date. Now, does anybody disagree with that change to the March meeting date? If so, please indicate. I am seeing nobody indicate, and therefore that matter is agreed, and I'm grateful for your cooperation on that. May I also remind members of the organised site visit on Thursday, the 12th of December, for members of the committee to visit Biotech CH4's UK anaerobic digestion plant at Hemswell. This is an opportunity for members to look around the facility and understand the process of anaerobic digestion. Members will need full PPE, including safety boots, high-vis, hard hats, safety, spectacles, and the entire gamut. If you need any further information or indeed equipment, please contact our Democratic Services Officer, Andrew. As always, we have a busy agenda ahead of us today, which includes the consideration of 2 pre-decision items. I'd therefore like to begin by asking those presenting reports to take those as read by members and only summarise the key points and the type of input that is expected of the committee. Introductions of reports will be capped at 5 minutes to ensure that we have sufficient time to consider and debate. We now move on to Executive Councillor announcements. Do we have any announcements from Councillor Colin Davey, Executive Councillor for Economic Development, Environment and Planning? And I note that we have his supporting Councillor Tom Dyer, in the chamber with us. Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good morning. Good morning, Colin. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, and good morning, members. I'm going to keep my announcements relatively short. You'll be pleased to hear. Firstly, I know the committee takes great interest in the vital work we do to support learners in Lincolnshire. I'm delighted that Ofsted recognised some of the fantastic work being undertaken by our learning providers when they inspected the post-16 education programme back in September. The report has now been published, and I'm thrilled to let you know that the service retains its good for overall effectiveness and outstanding for learner personal development. I know the committee will join me in congratulating all involved in this essential work, a vital part of the economy of the county. Funding from the Department for Education to deliver the 3-year Multiply programme comes to an end in March. The programme has outstripped all expectations, recruiting 4,745 learners in addition to 224 champions, helping to engage reluctant learners in maths provision. A full evaluation of the programme is underway to draw out the successful innovative ways of working, which will be incorporated into future adult learning programme planning. The Business Lincolnshire AI Adoption Accelerator was launched at the LEP conference on the 7th of November, and to date we have received 52 expressions of interest. The programme will be delivered to the first cohort of businesses in January. It aims to support business leaders through the journey of AI adoption, from overcoming initial barriers to implementing practical AI-driven solutions. There is clearly a real thirst for this support, and businesses are very keen to be engaged. We are very keen to meet business demand. So I am going to explore whether we can add to this programme to provide further AI education and provision to the business community. On the week commencing the 11th of November, this was International Trade Week. Business Lincolnshire and the Lincolnshire Chamber of Commerce attended the DBT Made in the Midlands Sold to the World Roadshow, which was held on the 12th of November at East Midlands Airport. Business Lincolnshire delivered the second large business roundtable event on the 14th of November at Indra Park Air in Market Deeping. And that again was in partnership with Team Lincolnshire. It focused on documentation procedures and requirements with the aim of identifying ways that larger businesses can support smaller exporters. So far, we have had an offer from Siemens to host an event for SMEs in 2025 around supply chains and carbon border adjustment mechanisms. And these are new regulations. And Dynex are now joining a peer network to provide some mentorship around business opportunities. I'm delighted to say we've now had a contract for £1.7 million for the Regional Made Smarter digitalisation programme for 25-26. The programme will continue as previous years with the addition of internships and workforce development. Inward investment inquiries have increased significantly since July after a slow start to the year. 12 new inquiries are actively being worked upon in addition to other live historic inquiries. Low carbon energy and advanced engineering and manufacturing are the sectors attracting most interest during 2024 thus far. Our support to the visitor economy sector continues. On the Visit Lincolnshire website, we have enhanced content on 29 towns in Greater Lincolnshire. This promotes the town's businesses and showcases visitor opportunities. As you know, Chairman, both you and I took part in a recent meeting with the Federation of Small Businesses, and I'm sad to report that business sentiment definitely now seems to be on a downward spiral. We have now significant numbers of businesses calling our distress line, asking for help and support as they try and manage their future. It's quite clear some of the changes, particularly around national insurance, are causing great concern to some of our small businesses across the whole county area. And I'm sure you might want to add further comment to that, Chairman. And finally, I'll just close with the fact that we have on this agenda today one of the most important papers I think my area has produced in a number of years, which is our long-term investment strategy. I believe that this is a real opportunity to showcase Lincolnshire in terms of what we plan to do for the future of economic growth and how we intend to do that across the whole county area. I won't say any more on that because you're going to go through that paper in great detail, and I look forward to you reporting the conclusions of the committee at the Executive Board next week, Chairman. So I'll stop there, thank you, and take any questions members want to raise.
Thank you very much indeed, Colin. Before moving to questions, I would just say that I was particularly pleased to hear your comments about learners. It's a really important function of this council. The work is regularly reported to this committee, and it doesn't just involve economic development, it involves the life chances of our residents. To hear so many of those, so many thousands of those had been helped is very important. And indeed, the package of various support elements that you talked about in your remarks really does underline just how comprehensive the support we provide for businesses across the county is. It is very concerning to hear the rise of calls to the distress line. It is concerning, but perhaps not surprising. Reports on a national basis do indicate a significant depressing effect on economic activity and potential for employment. And I sometimes think that we are trying to take one step forward at this council and other forces pull us 2 steps back, but we continue trying to do our very best for the residents we serve here in Lincolnshire. Does any member in the chamber have a question for Councillor Davey? Councillor Bowles.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just picking up on the point you've just mentioned, I just wondered, Councillor Davey, if there's any sort of clear indication in terms of those calls that are coming in from the hospitality sector about the difficulties they're facing. I certainly know from my experience in Gainsborough, the vast amount of conversations and calls I've had from local businesses worried post-budget has been those in the hospitality sector. So I just wondered if there was any, if that was being seen across county and whether there was any additional support looking into that particular sector. And then my second point, Chairman, probably should declare an interest, but does Councillor Davey agree that the historic success of Gainsborough Trinity Football Club in their FA Cup pursuits this season has had a massive impact on the economy of Gainsborough and the wider Lincolnshire area, and that will only increase with their increased exposure this week, culminating in being shown live on Match of the Day on BBC Two on Friday night? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowles, for those 2 points. Firstly, on business sentiment in the hospitality and leisure sector. I had 3 calls yesterday, all with businesses in the sector, all saying the same thing, which is that they're very worried about the future and that they're very worried about whether they can even continue going forward. You know, I think this sector has been very hard hit since COVID. And I don't think there's been any kind of support for it. I'm not sure what we're going to do, but I am monitoring it. And if you have specific examples you want to raise, please feel free to call me or drop me an email. And we can have a business team to talk to them to see if there's anything we can do to help businesses individually. As regards to the football club, fantastic. I always believe that profiling a place through either a sporting endeavour or a concert or an event is the best way of raising public profile. All the best for the club in their match this week, and let's hope they continue through the competition and keep raising the profile of Gainsborough. It's a real benefit for the town, and anything that exposes the town to national publicity is going to help it.
Thank you very much indeed, Colin. Do we have any further questions for Councillor Davey from the floor? I am seeing none. In that case, we say thank you very much indeed, Colin, for your contribution so far this morning. I now look to senior officers, Justin Brown and Nicole Hilton. Do we have any comments to make at this stage? I am seeing none. Therefore, we may move on to item 5 on our agenda. And that is the one I think that Councillor Davey was just referring to. Item 5 is the County Council's Economic Investment Programme. As part of its pre-decision scrutiny function, the committee is presented with a report addressed to the executive on this matter. This report can be found on pages 21 to 36 of the agenda pack. And the executive is being asked to review and agree on the proposed creation of a 4-year economic investment programme starting in spring 2025. This initiative aims to address growth constraints in key sectors such as food manufacturing, defence and advanced manufacturing, as well as support small businesses by developing suitable sites. And the programme is expected to generate approximately 3,000 high-quality jobs and strengthen the local economy by meeting critical business needs for space and for infrastructure. And the decision by the executive will be made on the 3rd of December 2024. We are invited, 1, to consider the report and determine whether we support the recommendation to the executive as set out in the report, and 2, to agree that any additional comments be passed to the executive in relation to this item. And the report will be presented by Justin Brown, Assistant Director of Growth, and Samantha Harrison, Head of Economic Development, is also in attendance for the debate. So, Justin, over to you.
Chairman, thank you. And as both you and Councillor Davey have described, this is a report which concerns a long-term investment programme which has 2 main objectives. The first one, to continue to strengthen those sectors where the Lincolnshire economy is at its strongest, and secondly, to intervene where the market for sites and premises in Lincolnshire is inviable. The purpose of both of those objectives is to lead to stronger businesses, to better high quality jobs, and to associated investment within communities. At the top of page 25, you will see that we carried out some simple analysis to identify how the commercial property market is operating. And what we saw there were the 4 bullet points, that the land that we have developed for commercial purposes has primarily been sold, and we are seeing private sector investment there. Secondly, that the amount of serviced industrial land is pretty low, and that makes it very difficult for us to extract businesses into the area. Thirdly, that our strongest sectors need tailored and bespoke types of provision. And fourthly, as I said earlier, the market is failing in some areas. So in pursuing the work around the programme, we have seen that we've got really 3 sectors that we would seek to focus our activity on, which is defence sector, food manufacturing sector, and advanced manufacturing sector. And those 3 sectors are sectors where at the moment Lincolnshire has a national and international competitive advantage. But it's really important that those sectors are supported to grow as opposed to stand still. And so the proposals in the programme are to provide customised office and industrial facilities with the potential of a training laboratory / factory for the manufacturing sector. So the proposals are laid out in the paper there. We also carried out some analysis of where the economy is struggling with matters of viability, and particularly where industrial estates are not being developed out commercially at a pace that the private sector requires. And in our work, we identified that West Lindsey, East Lindsey and Boston were districts where that issue is particularly acute. Despite being a Forest fan, I hope that Gainsborough go all the way in the cup and that we see a major investment in West Lindsey on that. So in terms of how we have identified those areas, we've looked, as I say, at where the market is failing, and we've looked at where there ought to be some leverage to help the sector to grow. So finally, In identifying those as strategic priorities, we then went and did some modelling of costs, and overall we expect that the programme will have a cost of circa £20 million, and the recommendation to the executive is to create that as a programme, but we would expect revenue returns, capital receipts for the council, meaning that this important investment is one which should be at little net cost to the council. We've not gone into specifics in the paper because this is about a programme, and the second recommendation to the executive is that as we work up business case detail for each of these initiatives, then that would come back through this committee and to the executive for their sign-off. So I shall pause there, Councillor Carrington.
Thank you very much indeed. Before I ask colleagues for questions or comments, I should, I think, not declare an interest, but just in the interest of transparency, state that as a member of North Stephen District Council, I'm dual-hatted. I do have an involvement in a similar programme at NKDC, and as Deputy Leader of that council, I have a formal involvement in the Sleaford Moor Enterprise Park, which is doing a similar thing to what we're talking about here. It's not a pecuniary or really an interest, but I wanted to make that declaration in the interest of transparency. Can I kick off in terms of questions? You've made very clear that we're looking at prioritising chosen sectors. How will the proposed £20 million fund be prioritised across those sectors? Do we know that yet? You've mentioned defence, agri-food, advanced manufacturing. And are there any risks of disproportionate allocations one sector to another?
So the second recommendation in the paper concerns taking business cases to the executive. In conversation with Councillor Davey and others, we're very clear that this shouldn't be about a first come, first served process. So as different business cases are being developed, we will provide information about where we are at in the round. And that will enable there to be a balanced programme as opposed to us, for example, seeing Project X and saying that needs 19 million and then you can't deliver anything else. So I would expect that we as a group of officers will manage a process that provides information to the executive, and I would expect the executive would be able to take decisions based upon that view in the round to ensure the balanced programme that I believe is at the root of your question.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Councillor Higgs.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two questions. One, would the sites be scattered around Lincolnshire so that as much of Lincolnshire can be covered as possible? And the second, would other businesses be precluded for expressing an interest in these sites? Would they just purely be limited to the ones that are mentioned in the report? Thank you, Chairman.
So the analysis we did was based absolutely on economic benefit and economic outcome. However, the analysis has created a set of recommended schemes which cover pretty much all of the county. So the point about spreading that you described there, Councillor Higgs, absolutely. In terms of working with businesses and precluding them, I think it's quite the opposite, and it's really interesting if you look at the sites at Gainsborough and at Skegness that we have serviced in recent times, that we chose not to service and then install business premises. We chose to service and then find a strategic partner who would build the premises themselves. And as I say, in both Gainsborough and in Skegness, that's been quite a successful model. And it's all about us investing our money where we can help to overcome that viability problem rather than us necessarily do it for ourselves. So we would certainly hope to work in partnership with businesses in taking this one forward.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move to Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thank you, Justin, for that report. As you said, Chairman, when you introduced this section, this council has a long and strong record of supporting the local economy and supporting local business. We saw that particularly the support we provided during the COVID period, and we now know we're needing to provide that support after the dig in the ribs from the recent budget. But good to see the effort this council's making, particularly across the county and in South Holland, to see the expansion of the food enterprise zone in Holbeach. To just ask a couple of questions, and then after I've made these points, we also saw page 32 future opportunities, and Port Sutton Bridge is mentioned. So can we have a briefing on the latest work around that? Because as we know, that's at the border of the county going into Norfolk, and it's been very successful in the past, and it's had some concerns in the recent history. It'd be great to know that there's a strong history and future for that Port Sutton Bridge. I know it's not on this report, but we've heard from the question comment there from Councillor Bowles regarding Gainsborough and football today. Has any work ever taken place regarding the economic benefit of football and sports clubs to a local economy? Because we know that kind of some economic benefit. We know many football clubs, for example, attract a few hundred people. If that could double to a few thousand, we know that would have some major impact on that local economy, particularly small town centres and independent shops. I just thought there's an opportunity there, rather than always supporting the rich and millionaires at the Premier League clubs, make an effort, support some of our local teams in Lincolnshire would have some wider economic benefit for the whole community. Thank you.
I'll send you a briefing on Port Sutton Bridge separately. As a Nottingham Forest fan who's waited nearly 30 years for them to get back in the Premier League, I sort of feel as though Premier League football's a great thing at the moment. But we did carry out some analysis when Lincoln came back into the professional leagues. And what we identified was that there was absolutely a pride and community benefit associated with the success of the club. And I think that's what you're describing in Gainsborough at the moment. But we also saw that the amount of spend from visiting fans and from people who were, well, frankly, going to the pub before the game, yes, was significant to the high street, actually. Really was significant. And if we look at the Lincoln City Football Club website, they have a section on there which is for visiting fans. And it basically says, if you're coming for the weekend, and increasingly that does happen with football supporters now, go here, go there, and so on. And you know, maybe there's something for us to explore about how we do the same, because a visiting fan who enjoys attending somewhere and losing to the local team, hopefully, but they're going to come back, aren't they? Because they've enjoyed the experience, they've been moved around. So thank you. We'll talk to Councillor Davey about that one.
One of the interesting things about Scrutiny is that you could never quite tell the direction it will travel, and the football-related theme which is emerging this morning isn't one that we actually expected when we had our pre-meeting and went through the agenda and the reports. I would just comment actually on football, a couple of things. I live in Cannock, just south of the city, but you can hear the sound when Lincoln are playing at home. And I remember when they dropped out of the league, nobody was parking in Cannock anymore. And now you can tell when there's, that they're up in Division 1 and the parked cars go all the way up sort of Hall Drive toward the centre of the village. And the effect, the positive effect, I think, on community spirit is very notable. in addition, and I'm really interested in that economic impact you talked about. And maybe it's worth thinking about this, and I mean this quite seriously as an item on the work programme. I'm also mindful of structural impact as opposed to ongoing ones. And I'm thinking of a development in Boston, where a new football ground was part of a development package with around 500 new homes, but also a great deal of commercial activity. It's known as the Quadrant. Now, the ground is there and is well used, and indeed it was used when Councillor Mrs. Austin was chairman and had a reception after her civic service. But also the sheer number of commercial enterprises which are springing up as part of that development, and that is ongoing. There are still new ones being brought into being as part of the original hybrid planning consent. That is making a significant contribution to the economy of the borough. So sport and sport infrastructure clearly can have perhaps a more serious impact than some of us perhaps thought. But Councillor Austin, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, follow that. Let's get the football bit out of the way first, shall we? Yes, I live within hearing range of the stadium, and I hear the cheers. Unfortunately, they're always the cheers of the visiting team. So we have the premises, and anyone in the South East Links joint partnership knows that we also have an excellent conference centre, being very conveniently midway between East Lindsey and South Holland. And we won't talk about the parking either, and perhaps Councillor Carrington would like to perhaps put on his other hat relating to the borough and drive down there through the Quadrant on a match day. It's a pity they can't find a car park to park in instead of every other available or not available bit of road. Right, seriously though. Now, I started by having read this. I thought, well, let's just look at statistics. All right, census figures that I could get probably about 2021, but Lincoln 81,000 and a bit, Boston 64,000 and a bit, Grantham, which is talked of being a big town, a mere 44,000. I'm just rounding these to the first two figures, and Spalding to 30,000. We've got a huge population in Boston, and we haven't particularly got unemployment, but people are not working in the borough. They are going probably down to South Holland. They go in buses all the time, and minibuses in cars, and it's not good for our transport, the traffic situation. Right, but that is not really the remit of this meeting. Now, land is the big thing, isn't it? Am I right? Justin, this is the thing. And I don't think LCC now has any land worth mentioning within the borough. But of course, what we don't have is nice little units, other than the odd one on what I call my industrial estate at Marsh Lane. We need these sort of service premises. Now, I noticed that further on in the report, you would say, well, there's no land unless, because Curtin's built out now, isn't it? Unless the borough decides to release some, let planning come on some of the other land. Obviously, I declare an interest as a borough councillor, and I think indirectly Councillor Carrington is sort of moonlighting, or perhaps not. You don't have to declare another interest there. So, is there anything we can do for this big population that can't be served at the moment without having to go so far out of town? I'm just having to throw this in and hope that a future council that I shan't be part of will actually find a way of dealing with this. Okay, thank
Justin,
you for
over to you.
listening.
Chairman, thank you. And yeah, you've mentioned the Curtin development. We're really proud of that. That's a large site which has developed out with some really, really strong employers and has given us the opportunity to solve a big risk in the town, which was a major employer potentially leaving the town, and we were able to use our land to avoid that taking place. As the report says, we believe that there is a need for more serviced land, the same as you've just described in the Boston area. It would have to be a departure from the local plan, and that would require the sort of conversations that we have with our colleagues at the Borough Council. They are taking place, so I can reassure you that we've identified that there's a need in Boston and that we are both supporting the economic case in moving this forward, but that we are also working with colleagues in Boston as the local planning authority so that when the time is right, we've got everything aligned and we'll be able to invest quickly.
Thank you very much for that. We now move to Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to read this report. It's really positive. I'm particularly pleased that we're looking at the defence sector, the agri-food sector and the advanced manufacturing and technology sector, because that's areas for real economic growth. So I'm very supportive of this. I'm also very supportive of Lincoln City Football Club. Not for us, Lincoln, definitely. And they're travelling to Crawley in the FA Cup on Saturday. And I can tell members that Lincoln City Football Club isn't just a decent football team. It's very well run and it's very much part of the local community. It shows you how football clubs can do good in their own area as well as doing good on the pitch. Oh, Mr. Chairman, I do contribute to the high street economy with my mates on a Saturday as well.
And a very important contribution it is, particularly at home games. Do I have any more comments from the floor? I'm seeing none. I think, Justin, we can summarise that as a very positive response from the committee. And again, it's a theme of mine while I've been sitting in this chair, the ability of local government to facilitate the prosperity and progress of the private sector. You mentioned, as did Councillor Mrs Austin, the site at Curtin. I've had professional involvement in that as a planner, and there's a very large new factory, a very sophisticated factory, going up now that otherwise wouldn't have done had we not made that provision. And I do think you made a very important point in your introduction that the county scheme as is proposed, rather like the North Kesteven scheme that I've got an involvement in, is not designed to compete with the market but to complement the market. And we have to accept that in an area like Lincolnshire, which is heavily rural but also large parts of it are what economists call geographically peripheral, which in plain English just means it's a long way from anywhere, particularly major transport routes, the market cannot always deliver what the community needs. And that's where we can step in, not, as you rightly said, losing money, but facilitating the ability of local economic success. So I personally wish this one very well. The actions before us are, we have a proposal. So I'm going to move that the committee supports the recommendations to the executive as detailed on pages 23 and 24 of the report. And secondly, I ask that our comments, as these have been captured by the scrutiny officer, are shared with the executive ahead of its consideration timeline. Do I have a seconder for that? I'm seeing the Vice Chairman. Thank you very much indeed. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous, but for the record, any abstentions, any against? Seeing none to either of those, that matter is agreed. Thank you very much. An important debate this morning. We now move on to item 6 on the agenda, local electric vehicle infrastructure contract procurement. I think they write these things just to see if I can actually say them. This is the next pre-decision report that can be found between pages 37 to 48 of the agenda pack. The Executive Council for Highways, Transport and IT is due to make the decision between the 2nd and the 6th of December 2024 on the approval of the tendering of a concession contract under the Local Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Fund, which is known as LEVI, on behalf of the Midlands Consortium. The initiative aims to enhance electric vehicle charging infrastructure across Lincolnshire, aligning with the local transport plan and leveraging future funding opportunities. And the actions before us this morning are: 1, to consider the report and determine whether we support the recommendations to the Executive Council for Highways, Transport and IT as set out in the report. Excuse me. And secondly, to agree that any additional comments are passed to the Executive Councillor in relation to this item. The report will be presented by Lana Meddings, Transport and Growth Manager. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. The report before you relates to the Local Electric Vehicle Infrastructure funding, which has been allocated to LCC by the Department for Transport. Lincolnshire County Council has been allocated 5.6 million of capital funding, which needs to be secured through an approval process with the DFT. Members may recall the Levi pilot project, which has been discussed at previous meetings, which saw us take the role as the lead authority across a consortium of Midlands local authorities. To build on the learning of the pilot and to maximise the funding opportunity to LCC, we've again taken a consortium approach and are working with authorities across the Midlands, this time with Herefordshire Council, Stoke-on-Trent City Council and Telford and Wrekin Council. This gives the Third Midlands Consortium a joint funding pot of just over £10 million. The funding is expected to make up 25% of the overall project cost, with a further 75% expected to be funded by the private sector. To receive the funding, the DFT require us to apply through a 3-step process. We're currently within stage 2 of this 3-stage process, which requires local authorities to produce a draft suite of tender documents, along with a draft contract for review which satisfies the scope and conditions of the Levi Fund. Once the approach is approved by the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles, the funding will be released, an MOU and grant offer letter will be signed with LCC, and we'll be in a position to go out to procurement. The report before you today sets out a summary of the specific requirements of the Stage 2 application and some of the key details proposed within the tender documents. Based on the financial model applied to the whole consortium, Lincolnshire is expected to receive a minimum of 2,496 standard sockets and 152 rapid sockets. The Levi contract will be a concession contract procured through an open tender through Pro Contract. It will be a 15-year contract with a 1-year extension. LCC procurement have been fully involved in the project and have worked with the consortium partners and the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles to produce the information required by the DFT. The project would enable LCC to deliver one of the priorities of the 5th Local Transport Plan, which is supported by an electric vehicle infrastructure strategy. The installation of on-street charging was a priority of the previous government and continues with the current government, who have already given a commitment of a further 200 million to the rollout of on-street EV in the recent budget announcement. The report recommends that the Executive Councillor for Highways, Transport and IT Services approves the role of the Council to continue to act as the lead partner for the Midlands Consortium, and that, subject to the receipt of funding by the Midlands Consortium as detailed within the report, approves the undertaking of a procurement for a concession contract for the Levi service to be put in place by each council for a term of 15 years plus 1-year extension for the anticipated whole life value of 16 years. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for mispronouncing the acronym. Levi, not Levy. There we go. It was a 50-50 ball, as we would say in football. I'll open it to the floor in a moment, but first can I just thank you on behalf of absolutely everybody. I know that anything to do with procurement and contracts involves a titanic amount of work. Local government procurement is never, ever simple. Having gone through all the papers of this in advance, I would just like to say, I know there's a whole team who's worked on it. they've done, I think, a very powerful job. Can I, before turning to the floor, start the questions off by asking probably the very obvious one, and that is about electricity supply. It is clearly very, very important indeed that we do everything we can to maximise the spread of electrical vehicle charging points in public places. Have we assessed the grid, which famously seems to provide difficulties? We were talking about commercial buildings a little earlier in the previous item. They often have great difficulty at getting sufficient electrical goodness, and high voltage installations for fast chargers are particularly challenging. So have we conducted a survey of grid capacity, and how is that looking, and how will that affect the rollout of the programme?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so as part of this project, we've liaised directly with the DNO, so the District Network Operator. As part of this, we've had to put forward a list of proposed sites, a very high-level list of sites, 900 plus we've put together, and they have assessed each one of those sites to say whether or not there is capacity within the network for an EV charger at that point. Some of that information that's come back is obviously highlighted areas where a connection is going to be problematic or where a connection is going to be particularly expensive. The benefit of the consortium approach and of doing this as a portfolio across several authorities is that the funding can, where the connection is lower in some of our city areas, in some of our more populated areas, it can offset some of those areas where the connection is going to be more expensive, which will mean that those areas where it may be an issue to get the private sector to install because of those costs in particularly rural areas, then the Levi funding will be able to help with that.
Yeah, I'm relieved to hear that. My supplementary was going to be, does that mean that rural areas will be at a disadvantage? But if I understand you correctly, what we're saying is they could be at a disadvantage, but we will work to make sure they won't be.
Absolutely, Chairman. So yeah, the funding across the portfolio will help to level up those rural areas. There will be areas where it just will be impossible because those connections are so high, as in the hundreds of thousands, and that's obviously not going to happen. But in those areas, we will always try and make sure that there's a charge point within a reasonable distance to those areas.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Griggs.
Thank you very much. The Chairman's covered a few of my points, so I won't reiterate those too much. Page 42 is generally where most of my questions lie, and it talks about the forecast for future uptake of electric vehicles. Coupled with the table at the bottom of that page, no, sorry, different table, the table on the page prior to that talking about how many current chargers there are and number of intended installations, do we think potentially it's a chicken and egg situation, that those people replacing cars aren't buying electric because there isn't enough electric vehicle charging points in areas across the county? And then I was just curious, and again I'm assuming it's due to the fact that Lincoln will have a higher uptake of electric vehicles than Boston, East Lindsey, etc. But it seems disproportionately high, especially if we go on Councillor Austin's statistics of population size. That is every area being represented? Is it purely because market failure is being addressed in that area, although that seems obscure in Lincoln? And then my final point is, can the standard sockets be upgraded? Obviously on page 42 it talks about a minimum of, wherever it's gone, I've lost the figures now, but there was a minimum number of standard ones and the fast charging ones. Is the facility to have those upgraded in the future? Again, going back to Councillor Carrington's point, is there grid capacity in the future? Or frequently in this committee we talk about grid capacity and the fact that we don't have any. And I appreciate we're doing all we can, but is there anything more we can do with the new government, for instance, to try and press for greater grid capacity that won't sort of hamstring us every time we try and improve the area? Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I'll try and remember each of those questions. So, yes, in terms of current charge points, I imagine it is a chicken and egg situation in that people are putting off buying electric vehicles if they don't have access to off-street parking where they can put their own private charge point, because that infrastructure isn't available yet on the street. So this will enable people to make those decisions in the next few years when the rollout of petrol and diesel cars comes to an end, and the uptake of EV increases. There's currently more charge points in Lincoln because this has been delivered by the private sector. So Lincoln has seen a number of charge points put into private car parks, and I think that's why, and the usage is increased because of visiting people using those. It's not wholly reliant on residents using those charge points, so it's the private sector that have led that market at the moment. In terms, can you remind me of third question, sorry, Councillor Chairman, was in terms of the energy.
Yeah, so there was the upgrading from standard sockets to new ones, and then the grid capacity.
Yeah, so in terms of the upgrading, so the conditions of the Levi funding are quite strict in terms of it is focused on low-powered charge points for residents, because the lower the power, the less expensive the cost to the end user. However, the market itself and the charge point operators that we've spoken to are all wanting to put in the 22 kilowatts. So it could be that they start as a 7 kilowatt charger, but the contract allows those to be upgraded to a 22 kilowatt. But it doesn't allow for an upgrade any higher than that. It has to stay within that standard charge point definition. The contract itself allows for a number of rapid chargers, but it's only 152 out of that whole portfolio, because again the constraints on the energy usage. Absolutely, we continue that dialogue in terms of energy provision in Lincolnshire outside of the remit of the Levi project, and is something that is being continually worked on as an authority. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. I just observe in a neutral way that we in Lincolnshire are being asked to make enormous provision for electricity generation through the potential installation of a large number of massive solar parks. We are being asked to make enormous provision for electricity transmission through the potential installation of a great swathe of pylons across the coast, but we don't seem to be getting in return improvements to our local grid, which is really rooted in the 1950s. There's a bit of an unfortunate imbalance there. Next was Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to hear your comments regarding the grid capacity. I do welcome this report, particularly encouraging to see the partnership between various councils that are not geographically connected. But we know this is a new and emerging technology, and there are many questions and many concerns, and quite some sceptics out there regarding this. Just a couple of questions. Does extreme weather have any effect on this, such as power cuts? Because we know you may have a fleet of vehicles on charge for a few minutes and an extreme weather and a power cut. Is that reinstated when the power is reinstalled, or is there a problem there regarding range of that vehicle when it's returned to? And regarding changing technologies, I understand there's a different charging point stroke socket for older EVs compared with new ones. I understand there's 2 or 3 different charging sockets. So again, page 42 speaks about multiple sockets. Is that those 1, 2 and 3 different charging points? Because I know some EVs are only compatible with certain charging points. Surely for this to work, all EVs need to be able to charge at all points, as happens at fuel pumps with petrol and diesel cars. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the first question and power cuts, the charge points operate much like anything else in terms of power cuts, once the energy supply is restored to the feeder pillar, then the charge points will continue operating. So depending on the outages, depending on, unfortunately, how long that car will be sat there not charging, and that will kind of be out of the hands of the charge point operator at that stage, I suppose. In terms of the actual charge points and that technology, older vehicles charge on DC charge, whilst the newer models are now coming forward as an AC charger. Our lessons learned through the pilot is that most operators are able to put both supplies through different type of sockets, so we can have a range of the different charge points across the portfolio. In a lot of cases, it may be that, say for example, you have a 22 kilowatt socket to charge at a DC rate, it would slow down to an 11 kilowatt charger to charge at those vehicles. It tends to be that the older vehicles charging on DC are, they take a lot lower charge, and this is why the older kind of EV vehicles, that there were a lot of, could be plugged in at home through the three pin socket in the garage. So there is a range of charge points across on the market, so we would make sure that there is a range as part of the portfolio.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Higgs, did you indicate that you wished to speak? You did. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions. I'm a little bit disappointed of the spread of the numbers of charges, standard charges versus the rapid charges. Because with the standard charge, I understand it takes some considerable time to get a useful charge into the vehicle. So I'm hoping that if that continues, that the standard charge ones will be mainly considered to be installed for on-street parking, and that the rapid charges will be more go into car parking areas, so that when cars are only going to be there for a short length of time, they can have a useful charge in them. And my final question is, are any of these going to be located in car parks that are controlled by this authority? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that question. Obviously, the project is based on the funding that's been allocated and the parameters that the DFT have set for that charging. So it is primarily to deliver on-street charging, so slow on-street charging for residents without access to off-street parking. So, but one of the other things to consider, as I previously said, is that the lower powered chargers do cost the end user less money per kilowatt hour. Whilst you can charge quicker at the rapid charge points, they do cost the end user significantly more. It is the intention, though, that those rapid charge points will go in what we call kind of hub locations, so they'll be in areas which can be used by residents, but will also be capable of being used by other users as well. As you say, with a turnover at the rapids of 2 hour maximum to charge your vehicle, whereby a standard is 8 hours anticipated to be an overnight charge by residents. And in the second question, sorry, in terms of LCC car parks, absolutely. So the project as it stands is on street in terms of highway, but if we have LCC owned land, that could form part of the project as well. The project as it stands doesn't allow us at the moment to put any charge points on third party land, so that's where the restrictions would lie at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Not a question, you'll be glad to hear, Lana, but a comment. Again, very pleased to see a particularly positive report which will help with economic growth in Lincolnshire.
Do I have any further comments from members? Councillor Dart.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just an observation, because I delivered my latest newsletter in North Highcombe, and I had the pleasure of delivering to Grinter Close, which you'll be very familiar with, because that's a development that NKDC have just redeveloped. And I was particularly impressed there because of the parking arrangements. Some properties don't have direct access to their properties for EV points. And in the footpaths, there is a channel where the cables for the EV points can connect from the house safely underneath the footpath to vehicles. And there was quite a few of those on that estate, and I was particularly impressed to see that, because that's the first instance I've seen that in Lincolnshire. And I know in some terrace streets, for instance, you do see cables going, over footpaths or through a window, and it can be a tripping hazard. But in this instance, I thought it was an effective solution to a problem there for properties to have their own EV points and connect it to their vehicles. And I know there's a question about whether they've got the right to park at the other side of the channel. But I was just wondering, and I appreciate I've gone off the agenda slightly, 'cause it's nothing to do with this, but have we as an authority yet agreed a policy on those sorts of channels being installed by residents, as you can lower a curb, for instance, if you want to drop the curb, to have those installed? Is that something that we have a policy for yet? So I was surprised to see it, I was pleased to see it, and I think it'd be great if that was an option for all residents across Lincolnshire, not just those lucky enough to have a new property from NKDC.
So we don't have a policy on the gullies, that's what they're terming them, but we are expecting national guidance on those gullies, but we are currently working or looking at a solution that they've got in Nottingham, so working with those in terms of what they're putting in, and actually some of our highways colleagues and myself are going to meet with them to look at those solutions that they're doing there. Because as you say, to have something flush with the pavement that doesn't have any street furniture would be fantastic. The issue, I suppose, at the minute is retrofitting that solution, whereas bringing it forward as part of all new developments is absolutely the position where we'd like to be in.
I think that's a really interesting point that you've raised there. Could I ask, Lana, when you've had your conversations with our Nottinghamshire colleagues, could you please report back to this committee when you've done that? And the other thing is, could officers please just communicate this point to the team being led by Becky Mellish, who are looking at the design guide for highways? Now, I suspect that the purpose of that project is actually slightly different, but we've got to remember that there is just one set of carriageway and one set of footways very often in urban areas. And we need to make sure that issues like this are captured and that they're aware and that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. Really interesting point. Thank you for that. So, any further comments from the floor? I am seeing none. In that case, just to summarise, can I say again, thank you for the very hard work which the team has done, and doesn't this underline the real value of doing a pilot in whatever we're doing? It just provides so much value. It is really easy with any of these quotes green, quotes eco schemes to declare a climate emergency or we have an objective to reach carbon net zero. Actually doing it is really, really challenging and requires an awful lot of very complex engineering, the appliance of science. It requires, as we've been hearing about the money, it requires an awful lot of accountancy just to actually deliver what sounds like a very sensible aspiration. It's really reassuring that the County Council is playing its part. So, proposal before us today, I move that the committee supports the recommendations to the Executive Council on Highways, Transport and IT as detailed on page 39 of the report, and I ask that our comments, as these have been captured by the Scrutiny Officer, be shared with the Executive Councillor and, as I said, some others, ahead of the consideration timeline. Do I have a seconder on that? Councillor Fleetwood just pipped Councillor Taylor at the post. We will now vote. All those in favour, please show. And just for the record, any abstentions? I see none. Any against? I see none. That matter is agreed. Members, it is now exactly 11 o'clock. I will take guidance from the floor. Do people wish to proceed, or would you like a 10-minute break? I'm not getting any answers either way. I'm assuming, therefore, that means everyone is happy to proceed. Getting nods around the chamber. In that case, we move, thank you very much, we move to item 7, Service Level Performance Against the Corporate Performance Framework 2024-25, Quarter 2, Economy, Flooding and Waste. This quarterly performance report can be found on pages 49 to 62 of the agenda pack. And the purpose of this paper is to provide the committee with a summary of the performance of the Council's economy, flooding and waste services. And the actions before us this morning are: members are invited to consider and comment on the environment and economy service level performance for 2024-25 quarter 2. The report will be presented by Samantha Harrison, Head of Economic Development, Chris Miller, Head of Environment, and Chris Yorston, Head of Waste. And we'll take questions after the report briefing. So, starting off with Samantha, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I will report on the 3 performance measures that impact economy. So the first one was the number of businesses supported by the council. This quarter we exceeded the target, and that was predominantly due to activities delivered through the Growth Hub. One of the, we heard earlier about the advanced manufacturing sector, and we have set up the GLEAM, Greater Lincolnshire Engineering and Advanced Manufacturing Network in partnership with the University of Lincoln. And during this quarter, we had 2 extensive network activities. One was finding support and helping those businesses look at innovation, and the other one was looking at new technologies in food manufacturing. So they were very well received, and we continue to develop them further. And I'm pleased to say this week we've got a trip to SHD Composites in Sleaford to look at their composite manufacturing processes. So the engineering and manufacturing sector is taking up that support alongside the Greater Lincolnshire Made Smarter digitalisation programme. Also, the Team Lincolnshire support is going from strength to strength, and we are seeing an increase now in the number of investment inquiries moving forward. In terms of the number of qualifications for adult learners, this time of year we do see more qualifications come through, particularly at that entry level, and then following on for level 1 and level 2 support. And I'm pleased to report here that we have exceeded the target for this quarter, and particularly because it's been focused in relation to our priority sectors. So we've been having extensive delivery in terms of our care sector, construction, accountancy, business administration and hospitality. So directly in relation to our growth sectors and sectors that need that support and extra workforce moving forward. The level of external funding achieved by the County Council is lower than we envisaged this quarter. We have received the funding from the Department for Business and Trade. However, there was a reduction in the timing and the signing of the contract for the devolution funding. So that, I'm pleased to say, has now come through and will be reported in quarter 3. So whilst we're behind target now, we'll be back on track in quarter 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll take questions after each individual speaker rather than holding them up to the end. By the way, I visited the composites factory in Sleaford myself a couple of years ago. It is absolutely fascinating. And one of the things that I think it underlines, and it's something you might want to pursue when you're there, is this whole issue of clustering, which we see, we put into practice very much with the agricultural industries hub that we have going ourselves. But that is issue of clustering, where one very important firm can encourage the presence of others. You think everybody's going to be in competition, but actually no. And there is great potential, I think, for Lincolnshire, using almost as seed corn existing companies. This is high-tech, high-skill, high-value manufacturing. It's exactly the kind of business we need to encourage. So do we have any questions or comments from the floor for Samantha before we move on? Seeing none, in which case, thank you very much indeed for that report. We move next to, we've got a choice of Chris's. Chris Miller, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, councillors. Yes, just briefly, the one flooding performance measure. As you know, we changed this recently to look at the number of Section 19 investigations that are actually completed within 6 months have been progressing. So we're still behind on that target because obviously we were from a standing start, but we are making progress each quarter. So we're now up to 69%. Principally because of the sheer number of reports that we had to complete after storms Babette and Henk last year still, which numbered 264. Just as an update to the report in front of you, 169 have now been completed and signed off and issued out. The remainder will be completed by Christmas. They will form probably the more complex ones going forward. But as councillors, those of you in areas where there were reports being undertaken, you should start to see the reports coming to you in a period 3 weeks before they're released to the residents. But other than that, happy to take questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that we're now in autumn and looking so nervously. The number of people I talk to who are really nervous about the weather, because the ground has never really dried out since we had a fairly dull summer, and everybody is looking with great apprehension at the sky. And we've seen the absolutely horrible sights of damage being done in the southwest, in Scotland, and particularly in Wales in recent days. It just underlines, in an era of climate change actually happening, not being a theoretical thing, how vulnerable we all are. Can I just add, it's slightly tangential but related to this. There is work going on by the Flood and Water Management Committee on the storm impact inquiry into Babet and Henk, which consists of all of their members plus one. On your behalf as chairman of this committee, I am that plus one. And I know that committee has made a great deal of progress. It is, in fact, there's a meeting to really review the final outcomes of that, which will be taking place this Friday. So work is continuing on that. Councillor Fleetwood.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Section 19 reporting. Whilst it's good to hear that we are getting through the list and the percentage of reports is going down, when you get to the report as a councillor and you look at the detail in it, sometimes there's one or two issues in there that possibly need challenging. Is it correct of a councillor to go back and challenge the report with the office, or do we go back through Mr. Mellor?
No, you can go straight back to the team on that, Councillor Fleetwood. They would have more knowledge on it than I anyway, in truth. But yeah, obviously the reports are done with the knowledge that we have at hand, with all the available resources that we can muster in terms of flood risk plans and so on. But if anything else comes to light during that period or afterwards that you become aware of, please do feed it in and we can reflect that in updating it. Thank you.
So all members, I'm sure, have heard that, and we can send that message out to every member of this council. We all have local knowledge, and I know, and I would pay thanks, by the way, in this committee, slightly separate to the Section 19 report, but work which is being carried out by a little heard of but incredibly important group, which is the groundwater flooding team that we have at this council. Various locations in the county, including Haington, which is in my division and district ward, have been very badly hit by groundwater flooding, and now they're between a hammer and an anvil. Surface water flooding is becoming more common. I spent a whole day in Haington with that team and two very specialist, very skilled specialist external contractors, and I was hugely impressed. It's an enormously challenging area. It's very intractable. This council won £6 million of central government funding to help us assess things on that front, which try and find solutions that may have national significance. And I did want to pay tribute, Chris, to the work that team is being done. It is hugely important. And I can tell you, when they met an awful lot of people, visited a lot of homes, spent a lot of time with the parish council, the community in Haington was enormously pleased to have them there. Any other questions or points for Chris from the floor? In that case, thank you very much for that report, Chris. And we move on to Chris Yorston to talk about the update on waste.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, councillors. Okay, yeah, just to summarise the four targets that we're looking at in waste. So for kilograms per household, we're at 523, so that's good because we're below the quarterly target, which means we've generally got less waste presented per household, and then that means less haulage and processing needed. For the overall recycling rate, we are below the target of 50%, we're at 42.93. However, that's similar to the Q2 last year, which was at 43.82%. However, we've got our plan to improve our recycling rates with our food waste project, which is progressing well, and we've secured the capacity for food waste at Biotech, of which we've got the site visit coming up in the next few weeks. The recycling rate at the recycling centres is 72.39. This is less than the Q2 of last year, which was 78%, so a bit disappointing. We have seen an increase in garden waste with some improved climatic conditions compared to the start of the year. However, we've also seen a concurrent increase in non-recyclables at the same time, so that's kept that recycling rate a bit lower than what we had hoped for. On our landfill target, we are still working excellently below the target level. We're at 0.27%, so well below the 5% target. It has been challenging, though, securing third-party suppliers at energy from wastes. We've had a recent shutdown at our energy from waste facility for a week, and we had an alternative supplier to take that to. They also had a unplanned shutdown at the same time, so then we had to then divert and find another supplier. So it is an ongoing challenge, but the team are performing excellent to that, and yeah, we're still maintaining that good rate. So yeah, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris, questions from the floor? I'm not seeing any. Can I just say, we did discuss at the last meeting of this committee a particular press report, which was a general report. It was not about our EFW plant, but was quite critical of energy from waste plants, and yet didn't explore the alternative, which is shoving the stuff into the ground, which is exactly what we're trying to move away from. Having joined this committee, visiting our own energy from waste plant, I think we were very reassured, particularly by the handling of material on site and making sure that that didn't cause disruption to nearby residents, and also by the fact that by the time it had been through 4 levels of scrubbing, the air that came out of our energy from waste plant was absolutely no different from the surrounding air in that part of North Hykeham in terms of making sure that we weren't polluting people. So we were very reassured by that during that visit. And I just wanted to pass that on to you to pass on to your team. So if there are no further questions for any of our officers giving reports, I'll move to the proposal. Excuse me. And I move that the committee endorse the report and that our satisfaction be recorded on the detail of measures employed to discharge the duties and requirements for each of these council services. And secondly, I also move that the committee's feedback be shared with relevant officers and portfolio holders for their information and further actioning. Does anyone dissent from that? No, I see no dissent. In that case, that matter is agreed. Thank you very much, and thank you to our officers. Moving on, we turn to item 8 on the agenda, Lincolnshire County Council Greenhouse Gas Emissions Report 2023-24. The next report is on pages 63 to 108 of the agenda pack, and the committee is being asked to review and comment on the County Council's third Greenhouse Gas Emissions Report, which details emissions sources, trends, contributing factors such as increased business travel and commuting post-pandemic. The report outlines the progress toward the Council's net zero target by 2050, highlights a slight rise in overall emissions due to operational changes, and includes proposed actions to improve future reporting and data quality, especially for indirect emissions. The actions before us are to review and seek assurances on the work that has been done to quantify the carbon dioxide emissions across the County Council's operations, excuse me, and secondly, to support the work that is underway to reduce those emissions. And the report will be presented by Chris Miller, Head of Environment, and Dan Clayton, Sustainability Manager. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll just go through some of the highlights from the report. This is our third greenhouse gas report that we produced as part of the Green Master Plan and our target to reach net zero by 2050. As Councillor Carrington was saying, the emissions have kind of plateaued this year, so and that's partly down to the national UK electricity grid has the emissions factor has risen for this year for the first time in about 15 years, because there's been a consistent fall, and it rose because there was greater use of the remaining coal-fired power station as it neared the end of its life. It had so many hours left that it could burn, and there was greater use of gas during the winter last year. So the emissions factor rose from about 197 kilograms of carbon per kilowatt hour to about 210 kilograms of carbon. So when you look at our gas and electricity consumption from the council's own buildings, those both fell last year, but because of this emissions factor increase, the amount of carbon reduction was down. So we were only slightly down from within our own buildings. And then we've also looked at indirect emissions. So these are emissions where we're not completely in control of the level of emissions. So things like staff commuting to work. So we don't control what type of vehicle staff commute to work in, or which transport method they use. And when you look at those figures, the emissions were up slightly, and that was because there were a larger number of staff that the council employed, and also because people were coming back into the office more frequently than they were in the previous year. As we kind of fully recovered from the COVID pandemic, our staff are now coming in more frequently. The other issue was that business travel emissions rose. So that was because, again, we've got a slightly increased number of staff, and it was a recovery from the pandemic. So I think we've identified this as a potential opportunity to reduce our emissions in coming years, and there's also a potential cost saving in there as well. So we're working with the Business Transformation Programme at the council and their Change Influencers group to work with staff to look at methods of reducing those emissions. And we've looked at options from other rural authorities where they've used pool car options and car club schemes that have been successful in cutting down emissions. We're also, as part of the transformation programme, looking at electronic signature systems that will mean that we don't need to send officers out to residents to get wet signatures. They'll be able to do it online with electronic systems. So yeah, that could be a significant reduction in our emissions. And then one of the questions that we've had in previous years is about working from home, and have we just switched emissions from within our own buildings to the homes of staff. And there's a new methodology that's been put out by DESNES and DEFRA, and I've used that to calculate what the working from home emissions are for this year, and it's given an estimate for it. So that's an overview of the paper.
Thank you very much. Before turning to the floor, I'll kick off questions. The question is how our progress, I think we said we're going to go to 81% reduction by 2035, how we compare with other with other counties. But that relates to something that you've just talked about, which is just how dependent we are on how much carbon is in the electricity supplied through the grid. In other words, we are not completely in control of our own fate here. Now, obviously, people can select electricity suppliers that say their supply is carbon, but often that's to do with offset documentation rather than how the electricity is physically generated. So, I wonder if you could just give us an idea of where we stand relative to others, but in the context of that. Would it be going too far to say that we're not in control, or simply that there are other factors that can really impede us if they so choose?
Yeah, I think absolutely there are. We are directly controlled of the electricity that we use. Because you've still got to use the national grid network. DESNES have done some work forecasting what the emissions factor will be up to 2050. And they know from works that are already in progress, so things like the expansion of the Sizewell nuclear power station and the new nuclear power station at Hinkley Point, and offshore wind farms that are already in approval or in construction phase. They know that by 2030, the estimate is that the emissions factor electricity will have halved from where it is now. So that will kind of give us even if we carry on using energy as we are now, that will give us a reduction by 2030 in our electricity consumption. I think comparing with other local authorities, I think we kind of have made a significant reduction. So we're over 74% down on our 1990 base levels, and we were quite fortunate that we've got data going back that far. A lot of authorities didn't. So I think we also compared it to the 2005 levels, and yeah, we're kind of ahead of the national curve on that. So I think nationally we're about sort of 50% down, but we know that we're over 70% down. So yeah, we are, and I think that's because the organisation has got a smaller estate footprint than it had in 1990.
Thank you very much for that, Dan. Councillor Griggs.
Yeah, just a couple of points, Dan. The table on page 73, greenhouse gas emissions from 2016 to 23, shows a much more positive picture. I appreciate you just painted us a positive picture of where we've come from since 1990, but that's from 2016 and we've still cut our emissions by half. And I think we need to be cognizant of the fact, what an achievement that is. I'm always slightly sceptical. Obviously, we need to look after the planet we've got, but not to the detriment of the services provided. And I think, we could sit here and go, we're not going at a fast enough rate to hit our 2050 targets, and obviously we need to be cognizant of that and try and come up with strategies and solutions to that. Some of you alluded to are already out of our control. But I think, the amount of things I read where it's, oh, you can do this, but is the cost proportionate to the reward? We could throw the kitchen sink at it to hit it and guarantee that we're going to hit our target by 2050. But then, is that fair to our residents who are paying their council tax? Are we providing good quality service? I would argue that if we speed up beyond what we've programmed to do, the answer to that would be no. So I think we do need to be careful of that. Just in terms of the people coming back into the office, one, how are we mitigating the tension of the carbon produced for commuting, especially at the times that everyone's commuting to the office, with encouraging them to come back into the office? And also morale-wise, are staff happy to come back into the office? Personally, I prefer being in the office than working at home. I think there's less distractions, but I know not everyone agrees with that principle.
Yeah, I think on the first point around the sort of reductions that already have been made, I think Carbon Management Plan 3 that we had that ran up to earlier this year, that made the projects are outlined in that made a significant reduction in emissions, and then the new Carbon Management Plan 4 that came through this committee earlier in the year has identified another kind of chunk of projects for us to introduce over 2030, and if we're successful in introducing those, they will put us in by 2030 at the kind of the 81% emissions target, which has been set nationally for 2035. So we'll be kind of at that level, well ahead of the timescale. And I think you've kind of outlined some of the challenges around the costs of reducing carbon emissions, because I think the initial projects that we did, like changing lighting from traditional fluorescent lights to LEDs, that saved carbon, but also saved running costs. There are a number of projects now that would save carbon, but would increase running costs, and I think that's the balance that we've been trying to get. And I think some of the national policies on gas and electricity pricing and how the pass-through charges are incorporated into those. They're looking at rebalancing gas and electricity. That's one of the proposals. I think that will even out that issue in the future. But at the minute, say if we put something like a heat pump onto this building, it would increase the cost of heating this building. So we've got to look carefully at other options like heat networks and geothermal opportunities, and also improving the insulation fabric of the building. So I think that's something for us to look at as part of the carbon management plan. And then the issue around commuting. I mean, kind of personally, I'm kind of happy with the mix of spending some of the week at home and coming in 2 to 3 days. I think that kind of works well, and I think that's been the kind of general feedback amongst staff. We are trying to improve the kind of commuting and the opportunities that staff have for commuting. So we're working on the staff travel plan within the council and looking to, promote alternative options, and then looking at other bases around the county as well that staff might be able to hot desk in and to cut down the amount of commuting that they do. But yeah, that's certainly something we are looking at.
You mentioned heat networks there, and I'd like to pick up a question about that, which is there's talk about the Lincoln heat network. Will that be compatible with the big new developments in places like the Swan Pool or the Southeast Quadrant Sustainable Urban Extension, the SUE? And I declare an interest here in that the SEQ SUE is very largely in my district ward, and I also observe that the new or updated local plan for central Lincolnshire, which came into being in April of last year, that has very powerful support and indeed very powerful requirements for the energy sustainability of all new buildings, be they residential or not. So in practical terms, how can we integrate that Lincoln energy network into those two big new developments? And are we going to be able to kind of retrofit any old bits of kit, or does everything get thrown away and replaced?
No, I think one of the key elements of the heat network is that it should be, relatively straightforward to connect buildings in. So it shouldn't be the case that you have to change radiators in the buildings, because it operates at a similar temperature to a traditional boiler system. So all your radiators in the building should still work. I think the developers that have been looking at the heat network in Lincoln, that they've got a kind of a long-term 10-15-year plan that they'll maybe develop one in the north of the city, one in the south of the city, and ultimately link them all up to create a citywide network. And obviously the big issue, or one of the big issues with heat networks, is the amount of disruption as they're installed. So doing it as part of an urban extension kind of really makes sense, because you're getting that that disruption out of the way as it's being constructed.
So just to final question on that, are the people developing the heat network actively in touch with the 2 or 3 major developers? I'm thinking now of the SEQ SUE, and I'm conscious of the fact that is perhaps physically a little bit more distant, a bit more separate from the city than Swanpool. Are they in touch with those different developers? Are they in touch with the local planning authority? How is it working in practice on the ground?
Yeah, well, they're definitely in touch with the local planning authority through it. I know that they've had discussions around the Western Growth Corridor. I'm not sure about the other urban extensions, but I can follow that up with the company that are working on it. Yeah, definitely.
Good. I think we need to push this. This country has a pretty mixed record when it comes to these sort of wider area energy systems, which have worked very successfully in our continental neighbours, and it's good to see this work going forward. Are there any further questions or comments from the floor? I'm seeing none. In that case, thank you very much indeed, Dan, and silent partner, Chris, this time, for an intriguing and very important report. And it's excellent to see that progress being made. So we move to a proposal, which is, I move that the committee endorses the report and is satisfied with assurances given on the work undertaken to quantify carbon dioxide emissions across the County Council's operations, and secondly, that the committee supports the ongoing efforts and initiatives aimed at reducing these emissions in alignment with this Council's net zero target. Anyone dissent from that? I see no dissent. In that case, that matter is agreed. Thank you very much. We now move on to the final item on the agenda, item 9, the committee work programme, and you will find this on pages 109 to 114 of the agenda pack. And the item enables the committee to comment on the content of its work programme, which will be presented by Chiara Hazianu, our scrutiny officer. And the actions before us are to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. Chiara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to confirm that there haven't been any changes made to the work programme as this has been published and indeed is found on pages 109 to 114 of this agenda pack, with a caveat of any additions made emerging from today's meeting. If members or officers would like to contact me offline to discuss any other report or themes or items that they would like to see included in future work agendas, do let me know. And this concludes my update. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm pointedly not mentioning football at this time. First item where it's not been mentioned, I think. Do we have any comments or questions or suggestions from the floor? I'm not seeing any, but as Chiara has said, contact her offline or myself or the Vice Chairman if so. In that case, we'll just move straight to the proposal, which is that I move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 109 to 114. Anyone dissent from that? I'm seeing no dissent, in which case that is agreed. And that now concludes the business of meeting. Thanks everyone for your attendance, officers and members in the chamber, and to anybody watching online or time shifting, looking at a recording of this. We now conclude the business and end the meeting at 11:35. Thank you very much indeed.